Hello and welcome to the first of two lectures on the civil rights movement, and this one is going to focus on the civil rights movement in the South. And before we begin, let's just have a look at the AP concept outline and our guiding question moving forward. Seeking to fulfill Reconstruction-era promises, civil rights activists and political leaders achieved some legal and political successes in ending de jure segregation, although progress towards racial equality and ending de facto segregation was slow. And that de jure and de facto, I've added that in there, and we'll get to that when we get to that. And our question, how did the goals, the strategies, and white support for African Americans' civil rights change as the movement expanded from the South and to the North? And where does it all begin? Well, it comes out of World War II and the double V for victory. Double victory, victory at home and abroad. Victory against racism at home and against the Nazis and Japanese abroad. And the Great Migration had a great effect on organizations like the NAACP. It just became easier for them to recruit new people, to organize, to campaign, to raise funds when people are living in the northern and western cities. And another organization is established during World War II, the Council of Racial Equality, and both will be instrumental during the civil rights movement. The desegregation of the military done through executive order, and Jackie Robinson, baseball player, sort of symbolically breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball, and just through his refusal to retaliate and his just great overall play, he will earn the respect of his teammates and eventually the country as well. So these are sort of symbolic early ones, and it's in the 1950s, though, that we get the Supreme Court we get the civil rights movement really going with the Supreme Court case of Brown versus the Board of Education. There's Jackie Robinson. So when I say de jure segregation, I mean segregation by law, and the series of Jim Crow laws that had been set up after the Civil War that separated African Americans and whites in all aspects of public life in facilities and parks and whatnot, and had been upheld during the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court case that argued that these laws are fine so long as things are all equal. Now, separate but equal. Now, this is showing extremes, but of course there was a little bit better funding for all sort of white facilities and not for African Americans. And the segregation of schools is going to be challenged, and the strategy is a legal strategy initiated by the NAACP, and a law professor and his team of lawyers, and under the leadership of Thurgood Marshall, later will be the first African American member of the Supreme Court, and they're winning cases, and their most successful is the Brown versus the Board of Education. So they're in the city of Topeka, Kansas, had chosen to segregate their elementary schools. And the Brown family, African-American family, their two daughters had to go to quite far to get to their school, and it's a dangerous trip across railroad tracks and then a long bus ride, whereas there's a white elementary school that's really nearby, and they sued for the right to be able to send their daughters to the local school. And the court agreed, and then that was challenged, and it went up to the Supreme Court. And they're not arguing this separate and it's also unequal. They sort of are saying, well, the facilities are inherently equal. The black school, the white school are pretty much the same. What they were arguing is that by separating the children by race, it's causing psychological damage by reinforcing into African American children that they are inferior, and it creates sort of self-hate. And in the other way, it creates and reinforces a sense of superiority amongst the white children. And so the argument goes forward that separating them by race is psychologically damaging to everybody. And the court agrees, unanimously agreed with this. And President Eisenhower, his cabinet, had also urged the court to end this, and using sort of the context of the Cold War. Everybody is watching us do the right thing. And it ends. Now, of course, there's going to be some resistance to this. And 500 schools do quickly desegregate, but many areas just outright refuse. And in a separate ruling, the court says that it should be done with all deliberate speed, which is sort of vague, and it's slow to happening. And President Eisenhower was sort of reluctant to enforce the law. He doesn't want to ruffle feathers. He wants to see the states doing this in what he would say all deliberate speed, which is sort of wink, wink, you can take your time to do it. Some of the other resistance. And we're going to get a showdown a few years after the court case at Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And 9 African-American students have been registered by the NAACP to attend school. And the governor has vowed that they're not going to be allowed in. And so the governor, there, Phoebus, he orders the National Guard to block the students. And when they arrive to school, one of them is almost lynched by the crowd. And this gets President Eisenhower to sort of step in, and he brings in soldiers to protect the students for this year, for their first year at school. There's the governor. This is the National Guard that was brought out to prevent them from entering into the school. There's Elizabeth Eckford, who was almost lynched. She was very lucky to get away from the crowd alive. And once they're in school, protected by federal soldiers, it was a lonely year of being isolated. But they're symbolically there. The governor would the next year close down the entire schools, like not just this school, like all the schools in the state. Now, meanwhile, while that was happening, and that strategy of using legal means to achieve their goals of ending the Jim Crow laws, the Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott had occurred. Now, Rosa Parks was arrested for not giving up her seat on a bus that she's supposed to do by law. And it's not that she's a little old lady who's feeling tired. She very deliberately did this. She was an activist within the community. And in response, an organization is formed to organize a boycott of the buses. And as they say, they're not going to get on the buses until they have full equality on the buses. And they're led by a 26-year-old church pastor by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. And so they organize, and they file lawsuits against the bus company saying this is illegal to separate us on the buses. They boycott and refuse to use them, and they organize other modes of transportation. And they get a lot of support from the black community. It's very effective, and outside groups and even some whites are going along with them, and they win, and the Supreme Court bans segregation on the buses. And Martin Luther King, because of this, is going to sort of step into a national leadership role, and his philosophy is soul force. He's getting his philosophy from Jesus. He's a message of love, not hate the white people. They're our neighbors. Civil disobedience coming from Henry David Thoreau, from the labor movement, how to organize people, and from Gandhi, the using nonviolence. And 2 organizations are sort of formed around this time. The Southern Christian Leadership Council, which is Martin Luther King's organization, and it's very much through the churches, and to organize nonviolent protests, and SNCC, or Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is a younger group. And SNCC and CORE are going to start organizing sit-ins, deliberately breaking the law, civil disobedience, by sitting in restaurants where they're not allowed to sit. And so these 4 gentlemen, they are breaking a law. As are they. And this is the reaction that they get. And they want this. And they want these photographs because the whole world is watching. Keep in mind the context of the Cold War. The United States is supposed to be on the side of freedom and liberty, the good side, against the dark, evil side of the Soviet Union. These kind of photographs are terrific propaganda for the Soviet Union. And it's shameful for many Americans to see this on their news, in their newspapers, and knowing that it's being shown around the world as well. In the South, many Southerners, white Southerners, feel a bit of shame for seeing this. Northerners are just disgusted, and the world is judging. And the national leadership, the president and Congress, are also considering, what should be done about these. And there they are in jail because, of course, remember, they were breaking the law. So when the police came, they don't arrest those white people for assaulting them. They arrest the black people for breaking the Jim Crow laws. Economic pressure is put on some of these companies as well. So some of the places where they were sitting are department store, restaurants and cafes, and these department stores have national branches. So they have stores in the north as well. So this is, I believe, in Chicago, saying we're not going to go shopping in your department store until you end the segregation within your cafe and your southern stores, and it's quite effective. Other civil disobedience: let's ride the bus, long distance buses, as to go from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans, and whites and blacks together are going to sit together, and they're going to break the law by sitting on buses where they're not supposed to sit. And they, of course, receive violence when those buses go into the Deep South. And sometimes it was really quite brutal, the violence, and especially towards the whites who were participating in this. And this puts a lot of pressure on John F. Kennedy. There's, within the Democratic Party, more support from African Americans because of FDR and the New Deal bringing them over from the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, where they had always traditionally been. And so African Americans are becoming like an important base within the Democratic Party. But their traditional base that they've always had has been the Southerners and the Southern Democrats. And they have very different opinions of how he should react to these civil disobedience. And he calls for a cooling off period. He doesn't want to see these kind of confrontations. It just puts him in a political bind. But SNCC and CORE adamantly refused. Like, no, we're going to keep doing this. And they urge more to do it, and for hoping for more violence. Not that they're being violent, but they want people to attack them. They want this publicity. They know that it's going to force change, and they know it's going to force change in the right direction. And so Kennedy strikes a deal with Southern governors. Protect these people on the buses, but you may arrest them when they break Jim Crow laws. And SNCC and CORE say, great, okay, so now we won't be beat up, and we can just get the jails filled. So when we arrive at the bus depot, say in Alabama, we'll have the black people go and use the white bathroom, and we'll have the white people go and use the back bathroom, and we'll be arrested, and we'll just fill the jails and bring on questions about what are we going to do about this. Another civil rights campaign of disobedience is the Birmingham Campaign, and this is a campaign of nonviolent direct action in Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most racist cities in the country, where the police are very heavy-handed in their use of force, and the segregation laws are strictly enforced. And the goal is to draw attention to these Jim Crow laws and try to get them by having young people go into areas of the city where they're not supposed to be. Direct action by youth. And then this is the response. And they want this. They want these pictures. It brings shame on the country, and it gets a lot of people to change their opinions and to see that, they're in the moral right, these children. And so when Bull Connor, the sheriff, he's the one who initiates this, and he sicks the dogs on them. And this is great imagery for the civil rights movement. And then, of course, they're put in jail. And Martin Luther King, who is helping to organize this, was also put into jail. And a lot of white Christian leaders had been urging him to stop doing this, to stop disrupting the peace in this way, challenge the laws legally, not through this non-violent civil disobedience. And King responds with a letter from a Birmingham jail, as is usually stated, where he writing directly back to those Christian leaders, saying he's in the moral right, and it's moral responsibility to challenge these unjust laws, and sort of making the argument of why civil disobedience is what he's going to continue to do. And around this time, as Kennedy is asking the nation, are we a land that's free for everybody except for black people? Same day that he gives that question out to the American people, the leader of the Mississippi branch of the NAACP, Meredith Evers, was murdered. That's a picture of him there. And it's in this context that we get the I Have a Dream speech, which I'm sure many of you out there are quite familiar with. And shortly after that, a bomb is placed in an African American church, blows up, and murders these 4 girls who were attending the church. It's this, more than anything, that really galvanized the Kennedy administration to stop sort of waffling on the issue of civil rights and to pursue real legislation to end Jim Crow laws for good. And we get into our sort of final campaigns in '64. And the Freedom Summer of 1964 is a campaign to assist African Americans in southern states to vote. And all of the organizations are participating in this. They set up a lot of other community services in these areas. And a lot of northern whites participating in this. And of course, they're facing resistance to it. And then finally, the Selma to Montgomery, Alabama marches. And again, it's sort of all of the organizations working together, where they want to do a long march, more than a day, from Selma, Alabama to the state capitol, and to demand their full access to participate in their democracy. And again, they are met by violence. And the Kennedy administration responds, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, by this point, Kennedy is being assassinated. Lyndon Johnson and the federal government take steps to protect the marchers. And under the protection of federal soldiers, the National Guard, FBI, they make their march. And they complete its 3-day march. 25,000 people complete the march. The attention it created was helped to pass the Voting Rights Act, and it's a symbolic end of the civil rights movement in the South. And we see the registration of voters that came out of the drive and out of the march and through the Voting Rights Act, and considerable increase, especially in Mississippi. And if we look at the legacy of the civil rights movement in the South, 3 important legislations are passed by Lyndon Johnson, initiated by Kennedy, and Johnson got them through Congress. Quite difficult to get these through Congress. The Civil Rights Act banned all discrimination based on race. No more Jim Crow laws. Cannot have them. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 got rid of some of the obstacles for African Americans to vote, offered protection, multi-language ballots as well in some places, and the Immigration Act, which ended the quota system on immigration, long-term effect of opening up immigration from all parts of the world. So if we just summarize, the goal is to end the Jim Crow laws, is to end the de jure segregation in Southern society. They use a number of strategies. They use legal strategies such as Brown versus Board of Education. They use economic pressure like the boycott in Montgomery, and they use civil disobedience to create imagery that shames the nation and forces the politicians to act, and they succeed very much so, and it can very much be considered a success. And I'll see in the follow-up lecture in the North, they face different challenges and have limited success. Thank you very much for listening.